Hi, it's Miss Kellett, and I'm going to go over rhetorical analysis with you so that you feel a little bit more prepared to write the rhetorical analysis essay. So first of all, the rhetorical analysis essay prompt on the AP test is always going to look really similar. So the prompt will always ask you to identify the author's purpose and explain what rhetorical choices they made in order to support their purpose. So here's an example. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Johnson makes to achieve her purpose of paying tribute to Eleanor Roosevelt. In your response, you should do the following. Respond to the prompt with a thesis that analyzes the writer's rhetorical choices. Use and select evidence to support your line of reasoning. Explain how the evidence supports your line of reasoning. Demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation and use appropriate grammar and punctuation in communicating your argument. Okay, so you are going to basically argue what the writer's purpose is and then what rhetorical choices they made that best supported their purpose, especially given the rhetorical situation. So the audience and the context of that surrounds the text. Okay, so you've already looked this stuff over. It's important to know the difference between rhetorical situations and rhetorical choices. So you can take a look at these slides on Google Classroom. I also have a list of appeals, modes and patterns of development, and devices if you want to take a look at the definitions for each of those. And it's important to know that speakers make choices based on the rhetorical situation. So the rhetorical situation is going to be your speaker, their purpose, the audience, the context, so what's going on historically or socially in the world outside of the text, and the exigence, what event has caused the text to exist, caused the speaker to create the text. So as we write a rhetorical analysis essay, we select which choices the author made that are most effective given the rhetorical situation. Okay, so I want to kind of go over a little bit more closely what you want to do as you're reading the text that goes with the rhetorical analysis essay. So when you get a rhetorical analysis essay, you'll have the prompt, and then you'll have a text that you have to read because you're going to be analyzing that text. So as you read, you want to look for clues about the rhetorical situation, especially in the blurb and especially about the audience. So for example, I'm taking this text written by Daniel Defoe. He writes this essay about how women should be educated. And we notice in the blurb, which is like the introduction, before we actually read the text, there's always usually an introduction. It's written in 1713 during the Enlightenment period. So we know that, that there's a focus on reason and education, not just faith during this time. We know that he is arguing in favor of women, so that helps us with the rhetorical situation. And then in terms of the audience, he addresses his audience as civilized and Christian. He also talks about how women, if they had the advantages of education equal to us, that they would be guilty of less than ourselves. So we know that he's talking about men who are Christian and educated. So it's important for us to kind of look for hints, especially about the audience, but also about the context, like what's going on in the world at the time that the text is written, because that's going to help us understand why the text is effective on the audience, right? Like how does the author achieve their purpose given the audience and the rhetorical situation? Next, when we're reading, we're going to chunk the text and briefly summarize as we read. So what I do is I just kind of make a comment off to the side, and I just briefly, even like if it's a phrase, briefly explain what each paragraph is about. And that way it makes it a little bit easier for me to come back and find particular things in the text. When I say chunking, I mean taking the text and breaking it into sections like a beginning, middle, and end. So I think these first three paragraphs go together because they're starting to introduce the idea that women aren't educated, but they maybe should be. And also in this beginning part, he talks about how we are civilized, we are Christian, women are not educated, and men might not be educating women because they fear that women would be stronger than men. So it's kind of setting the stage, and it's also yeah, it's kind of like explaining background information, and it's also like kind of like starting to say like, you are Christian, right? And you're not scared, are you? So it's kind of like uh, giving the audience a reason to care about this issue. And then this middle part kind of goes a little bit more in depth about like how women are perhaps they could do more if they were educated. And then this next section talks about how a woman, if she were educated, would be like perfect, especially for men, right? The man that has such a one to his portion has nothing to do but rejoice in her and be thankful. And then he contrasts that with a woman who is uneducated in this paragraph. So we kind of have compare and contrast between paragraph 7 and then paragraph 8 through 15 is all talking about uneducated women. And then we also have a cause and effect. So we have education causes these good traits in women, and then lack of education causes these negative traits in women. And then these last two paragraphs kind of wrap everything up. So I guess I've kind of got 4 chunks here, but I actually have decided that the things I think are most relevant are going to be the fact that he talks about Christianity at the beginning, also in the middle, and also at the end, and then also this compare contrast and a cause and effect. So that's what I'm going to kind of focus on. And when I go through the process of chunking, it helps me to decide what I'm going to focus on when I write. Identify major modes and appeals. So you'll notice that I've kind of already done that, right? Like, so he's talking about Christianity multiple times throughout the text, and this would be a shared value that he has with the audience. So that could be ethos. It makes him more reliable and more trustworthy, and like he has a shared background with the audience when he talks about Christianity and uses that kind of language. Okay, so he says sublime, sweet, soft, heavenly, angelic, which are all kind of like religious type of words. And then he uses the devil here, and he talks about God and how God has created women with souls capable of the same accomplishments as men. So we've got some ethos. And then a mode that I'm noticing again is that compare contrast here between the educated woman and the uneducated woman, and cause and effect, right? So he's talking about if a woman is educated, this is the effect. If a woman is uneducated, this is the effect. So those are like 2 modes, and I would actually link those to logos, right? Because when you use a mode like cause and effect, it sounds very logical, and it helps to make his argument sound logical and reasonable. Now, these might be different depending on the text, and you can find a list of modes and appeals earlier in the slideshow, and actually at the end too. On the last slide, you'll find a list of appeals, modes, and devices that you can look at. Okay, and then finally, you're going to identify the author's main claim and main supporting evidence. So his claim, let's see here. It's kind of this right here. I'm confident had they the advantages of education equal to us, they'd be guilty of less than ourselves. So he's basically saying that like women should have an education because they could do a lot with it. It might also be, it could also be this part right here, right? The like, I can't imagine that women shouldn't have an education, right? That they should be just house caretakers, right? That they should be more than that. So that's kind of what he's arguing for, is for the education of women. And I would say that his main evidence is kind of like describing how women, like what kind of education women have now, describing what an educated woman looks like, and then also describing what an uneducated woman looks like. So that's kind of like his main evidence. Okay, and I might be like taking notes as I'm going through this, but this is just kind of like what you want to be looking for as you're reading the text. Okay, so when you go to write, you want to begin by thinking, I will not just make a list of all the things I see, right? So I didn't really go through and find any particular like small devices. I might find a couple devices that help with the appeals and the modes, but I really want to pick and choose what I think is going to be the best and the most effective parts of the argument. So what are the most effective parts of the argument in the text based on the rhetorical situation? So because I know that the audience is educated men during the Enlightenment period, I'm going to focus on Christianity because he uses like Christian language throughout the speech or throughout the essay. And I'm also going to focus on like logic, since the Enlightenment was a period that really focused on reason and education. So I'm going to go ahead and focus on those two things. I think they're the most effective based on the rhetorical situation, which is like the context of the Enlightenment period and the audience who are educated Christian men. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And what 2 or 3 strategies from the text do you want to discuss? Well, I think that like his use of religious language is one strategy, one choice that I want to discuss. And then I also want to discuss his use of compare contrast and cause and effect, because it feels like that is pretty logical, and the fact that his audience is educated and is looking for a logical argument would make the compare contrast and the cause effect really powerful. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And I might actually say that like during the Enlightenment, they're mixing education with religion, and this text does a really good job of reflecting that, because he does mix religion with like logic and education. And then I'm going to outline. So I'm going to write my own claim, and I'm going to plan 2 or 3 body paragraphs. So you need to have 2 or 3 rhetorical choices from the author that you are discussing, right? So you are going to discuss 2 or 3 rhetorical choices. Now those choices can be appeals, right? Like ethos, pathos, logos. Those choices could be tone or diction, right? So like the feeling behind the words or the word choice itself. Those choices could be modes, right? So they could be compare, contrast, or they could be description or narration. So it's really up to you, whichever choices you think are the most powerful, that really stand out to you, especially given the rhetorical situation. So I've kind of selected word choice, Christian word choice, right, or religious word choice, and then also like this logical compare, contrast, cause, effect that's going on in paragraph 7, 8 through 15. So that's what I'm going to focus on, but you would want to pick something based on your analysis of the text, right? So based on the rhetorical situation, what do you think is the most effective that the author does? Okay, and so I came down here and I kind of drafted a claim. So my claim is that Defoe addresses his male Christian educated audience's dedication to both Christianity and logic. So I'm saying who his audience is. Oops, I'm gonna open up an extra window here. Okay, who his audience is. Highlight. Okay, and then I'm also saying like, kind of describing them as like they are dedicated to Christianity and logic. And then I also say like what he used to address his audience and to make his point, right? So using religious diction and by clearly outlining the effects that education of women have on men. And then I also need to say like what his purpose is. So I might say these 2 rhetorical choices help Defoe to establish clear reasons that women should receive an education, namely that women who are educated help to benefit men, and kind of like live out their like God-given purpose almost. Okay, so that's going to be my claim. And I'm going to add more to my intro paragraph later, but I really just wanted to plan out like what is going to be the bones of my essay. And then I planned out each body paragraph. So my first body paragraph, I'm going to talk about the religious word choice or diction. that the author uses throughout, because at the beginning of the essay, he reminds the audience of their Christianity. And then throughout, he uses religious word choice to imply that women who are educated are beneficial to the whole of society. And so so in my, like, in the meat of that body paragraph, I'm going to refer to both like this line here, where he talks about being civilized and Christian, but then also this paragraph, paragraph 7, where he talks about like how they're sublime and angelic and heavenly and soft and sweet. And then also here at the end, where he talks about how women are delicate, glorious creatures with souls, right? So I'm going to talk about all those things and how it helps to prove that women should receive an education. And then in body paragraph 2, Defoe addresses his audience's need for logical reasoning during the Enlightenment period by organizing his thoughts, right? So I'm showing like, oh, he's using logic. He's like clearly outlining and laying out his argument in a logical way by using comparison, and then by also using cause and effect. And then I'm going to go into kind of the outline here that he does with the educated woman versus the uneducated woman. And I also noticed that he uses some parallel structure here, how he repeats for want of teaching, for want of judgment, want of breeding, want of manners. So I might talk about that as a device, right? Like the repetition of the language and how it creates like a structure that is very like clear and logical by repeating phrases like that. So I might include that as part of my evidence. It would be a device, but it really falls under the umbrella of like logos, right? Like the logic and the comparison and the cause effect. Okay, and then my conclusion is going to be, just wrapping everything up, he mixes logic and reason, focusing on benefits to men because men are his main audience. Okay, so again, I've written out my claim. I've planned 2 or 3 body paragraphs, and each body paragraph is going to have a clear focus on 2 or 3 things. So 2 or 3 pieces of evidence that all work together to prove the same thing. Okay, your organization of your essay might be a little bit different depending on the text, right? So it all depends on the text that you're reading, how you are going to organize your body paragraphs. Okay, and then this last slide has additional resources. So we have some language patterns here, an in-depth look at rhetorical analysis. This is like a packet you can take a look at if you want to, and then a list of appeals, modes, and devices. And I'm also going to link this video right here on the slideshow as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this helps, and good luck.